So the PNC has chosen a candidate, the congregation or session has elected the candidate. Now, how do we get that candidate into the pulpit? The candidate has been elected and is ready to be installed and or ordained. Now, it's important to note up front, temporary pastors are called, but they're not installed. Only permanent positions are both called and installed. So if someone is installed and or ordained, there is installation and or ordination service. And we provide a document to the candidate and to the church called Ordination Installation Guidelines. The service allegedly is an act of the presbytery. And though it is indeed an act of the presbytery, it's actually organized by the candidate, her or himself, and it is hosted by the local congregation. We are there to be supportive, we are there to answer questions, but it's really their service to craft because we want it to be personal for them and special for them. The key information that you should convey as a COM liaison to the PNC and to the candidate is that our protocols require an administrative commission of 7 persons. 4 pastors and 3 ruling elders, or 4 ruling elders and 3 pastors. It doesn't really matter the configuration so long as the ruling elders all come from a different congregation. Pastors, they're members of the presbytery, so it doesn't really matter, but ruling elders need to be all from a different congregation. And this is the act of the presbytery leading the installation or ordination service. The final little note that would be helpful to convey is the candidate should check with the presbytery moderator first thing before anything gets scheduled, because the moderator is the one who will ask the questions of installation, the questions of ordination, and so it's important that the moderator's calendar be checked with before any service is scheduled. I've promised you this several times during this training. Now here it is. What are the differences between a temporary and permanent position? These are the only positions listed in the Book of Order. Our presbytery has a few other categories of types of positions, just for our clarity's sake, but generally temporary versus permanent is the big distinction. Temporary positions are not installed, permanent positions are installed. Temporary positions, the Board of Pensions is optional. In installed positions, Board of Pensions is required. Now let me just stop there for a second and say, the fact that BOP is not required, that it's optional for temporary pastors, is a BOP rule. It's not necessarily a presbytery rule. But I think it's important to say that morally, ethically, we have a responsibility to have our pastors receive medical care, and that we want to make sure that they are not put at risk because they are a pastor of a church. But there are certain circumstances where a spouse may have medical coverage, or the pastor may have medical coverage through a former or even current military service. So there are circumstances where it's okay that a church isn't paying Board of Pension major medical dues, but we want to make sure that our congregations are taking care of their people who are serving them in the name of Jesus Christ. So continuing the distinctions, temporary is called by the session, permanent is called by the congregation. A temporary is for a designated term. Usually these are 12 months and that they get an annual approval. That doesn't mean that their job is at risk. I've known temporary pastors who have been temporary for 13 years, and every year they get an annual approval. But the permanent pastor is what is more common and what we're a little bit more used to, and that is a perpetual term of service until either the pastor or the congregation says, you know, it's time to break up the party. So we continue on. Designated terms, usually 12 to 24 months. If it's a designated pastor, it'll be 24 months, and we'll take a look at whether or not the relationship is working. We usually do designated pastorates when there have been some kerfuffles in the church, and we want to make sure that they're having a considered, thoughtful, and lots of eyes on this relationship pastorate. And we're going to do an evaluation, both the session and the COM is going to do an evaluation at the end of the term before we approve it and move it forward for another term. This has been a long presentation. I thank you for your patience. I've thrown a lot of material your way. There's a lot of information to manage and to sort through. I guess you have questions. If so, let the discussion begin.